Welcome to the Irish NFL show and welcome to our Week 10 preview show. Hard to believe we're now in double digits. The Rams and Dolphins both on byes this week, and the teams with the best record in their two respective conferences, the Chiefs and the Eagles, also on a bye, giving a chance to their rivals in each conference to make up some ground. The Patriots take on the Colts in Frankfurt. That game is live from 2:30 at Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar this Sunday. Buskers will be screening Niners at Jags from 6 p.m, Lions at Chargers from 9, and Red Zone, of course, all night long. And just a reminder that there's free finger food for group bookings of 5 or more for Buskers for NFL games. The Bears host the Titans in a game with serious implications for draft order, if nothing else, in just a few hours' time. Brian and Andrew Morgan preview that game in our Thursday night football podcast. Now, our first section of game previews and picks tonight is brought to you by RuPoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. You can see how RuPoint can help your business at rupoint.com. And it is to Frankfurt we go for the first of our previews. Colin, the Patriots are the nominal home team against the Colts in what is now the last game of what's been another really successful international series of NFL games. It's a long time since the Colts could have gone to play New England with such confidence, and certainly they have some scores to settle from back in the Peyton Manning days. Do you reckon that this is one where they'll start to write some of the blood in that ledger?
I suppose I was thinking of this week's games in terms of 90s throwback songs, and I think for this one, Connor, it's Jocelyn Enrique's "Do You Miss Me," and for the Colts, that's probably to this year and Anthony Richardson, but for the Patriots, obviously, we've got to go back. It hasn't worked in the post-Brady era, and now Josh McDaniels has lost his job as well. The more time that goes by, the more of a genius Tom Brady looks, and the more of the sheen that comes off everybody else. And certainly it's some sort of kind of Oscar Wilde picture of Dorian Gray type thing that is going on there. Look, the Patriots, because of Belichick, will always be competitive on defense. But to me, I suppose, look, if this game was in New England, I think it'd be better for them. I think actually having it in Frankfurt, even though we saw last week when we were there, that was more like a home game for the Chiefs. I think the Patriots fans will show up, but I think the Colts have shown that they can score points. The Colts' issues are on defense this year, not on offense, even though they're without Anthony Richardson. I just don't think the Patriots are going to be able to score enough points to keep up with the Colts. And for that reason, I'm going to say the Colts to win a tight one.
I'm going Colts here as well, Brian. Interested to hear your views, though. I mean, I'm thinking even in last week's game, Ramondre Stevenson broke off a big run. And honest to God, it's the first time in a long time I can actually remember anyone on the Patriots offense doing anything explosive. There's just so little happening there. As Colin said, they're more than equipped to hold most teams, and they've been more than a match for even the best offenses that they've faced. But they're not putting up points at all, and that's just a recipe for disaster.
No, and everybody was raving about that performance offensively against the Bills a couple of weeks ago in the home game, which they shocked the Bills. But we spoke on Tuesday night about the off-season. You could say that this Bills defense, so maybe it's not as precious as it was a couple of weeks ago in terms of when you reflect on the other performances since. This is a big rivalry, like you think the Manning, the Brady, the old days. These were great games in the past. AFC Championship games. But the two teams have gone so different in so many ways, gone very different directions. I think I'm going to go against Colin in the sense of I think this actually might be a blessing for them to play this game in Germany, because the pressure has been mounting on the Patriots at home, in particular with the local media. I know it's not reflective of where the game's been played, but there's even a suggestion this week if they were to lose, Belichick could potentially lose his job, which I just think is absolute. But it's coming, and there was you look at it and you go, that makes no sense, and you go, that's clearly come from a beat writer who's not linked to the Patriots whatsoever, and it's one of their beat writers at the forefront of everything they do these days. So you wonder where the story's coming from. I'm going to side with the Patriots in this game. I think being in Germany, having time away to get away from the pressure that's in New England, obviously the disgruntlement within the fans, I think it might be give them a bit of energy, a bit of life. And I don't trust that Colts defense. And was Mac Jones is having a struggle of a season, I think he could potentially, if he gets players going in the right direction. And Stevenson, maybe that's the spark last week that they need to get him going. So I'm going to lean Patriots. I'm not confident about it. I think it'll be a tight game. Just think Patriots sneak it.
Browns Ravens column in the early window is clearly the standout game. Like this is a proper bloodbath. It's a real AFC North scrap. It's strength on strength, at least partially, in that you've got the Ravens offense, which is really humming right now, and which looks like it's a match for anything that they've come up against that ferocious Browns defense. Offensively, Watson, to give him his credit, looked a bit cleaner last week. They do seem like they've got a little bit of a connection, at least with Amari Cooper, which is something to be thankful for from a Browns perspective. But are the Browns equipped to take on this red-hot Ravens team who've put down statement wins against the Lions and against the Seahawks in recent weeks and made contenders look like pretenders?
I don't think so, Connor, because for me, I have Lamar Jackson as my MVP frontrunner currently. And I know there are lots of thoughts and opinions, and there's the back half of the season to go, and it could look very different. But Montel Jordan sang, "This is how we do it." And my goodness, is Lamar Jackson showing this is how to play quarterback in the NFL. He can beat you every which way. The Ravens can beat you every which way. And while the Browns defense is humming and has been spectacular, some of the time that has been down to Myles Garrett and his absolute freakish ability. And they have not looked the same outside of Cleveland. Now they've got to go into Baltimore. I think this will be a very hard fought game, but I think the Ravens defense has been incredible. And it's funny because people have, when I was talking about Lamar as MVP, people have pointed out Jalen Hurts' stats in terms of passing yards and stuff are better. And I'm a big fan. Anyone who watches this show for probably 10 minutes will know I'm the conductor of the Jalen Hurts hype train. But Lamar hasn't had to pass in that way. They've been able to ease up because they've been just so dominant. And I do not think, again, that similar to the last game in terms of, I don't think the Patriots have the weapons. I don't think the Browns have the weapons to keep up with the Ravens here. I have the Ravens winning and continuing to tighten their grip on that division.
Brian, not to by any means make it all about my fantasy league team, but I'll give you a nugget here, which I think is telling in terms of how the Ravens are playing right now, and something that we've talked about. Lamar put up 11 fantasy points last week. And I was looking at it going, how does he only get 11 fantasy points when they're after putting a beat down on the Seahawks? And meanwhile, I had CJ Stroud on the bench, which is a completely another story. But the point there is that there's diversity in this offense, there's variety in this offense, there's different ways to hurt you that we just haven't seen before in the Lamar era. He doesn't need to play hero ball. He's not playing hero ball, and they're able to pack him up in cotton wool and bench him for most of the fourth quarter. That's how well they're playing right now.
Yeah, I think a lot that's down to the running game. The running game has really come back. Bearing in mind they lose Dobbins earlier in the season, we've seen Edwards kind of come to the fore of the last few weeks. Number of touchdowns, 3 of which in Arizona, and then obviously he scored again last weekend. So kind of back to the point we made on Tuesday. Right now they're playing the most complete and complementary football across the board, whether it's defensively, special teams, offensively. They don't need Lamar to be out there swinging. They can do methodical stuff like having these nice long drives, eat up the clock, no high-scoring games, and still find ways to put the ball in the end zone. Doesn't necessarily also have to be on Lamar, which is kind of reflective on those fantasy points. I'll imagine we're all going to go full house here. I'm on the Ravens. I'd like to see the Browns win. I think the Browns if you look at all the stats across the board, they're the number one defense in the league. But this is a different beast. They're going up against on Sunday. They couldn't slow. They slowed Lamar down for about a quarter and a half in the first game, and then Lamar ends up running in 2 touchdowns. That's the type of game I see on Sunday. Yeah. Ravens for me.
This is the point of the season where sometimes the stats can really fool you if you get too deep into constructing a narrative. As you say, Browns statistically, quote unquote, are the best defense in the NFL, but a lot of that is reflective of who they've played and who they haven't played. This is a divisional game, so you're not going to be complacent and say that it's going to be madly one-sided in one direction or another. And the Browns certainly have what it takes to make this competitive. And in some ways, you could argue that a Browns win actually would be the most entertaining result because it gets that AFC North even closer together and makes it more entertaining down the stretch. But I don't see that. I think for all the reasons that we've been talking about, it's looking very much like a Ravens win. You know, we were laughing on Tuesday saying every time a team is the anointed one this season, they go down. But I don't see that happening to this Ravens team. I think they're too well coached. I think they're playing too well on both sides of the ball, and they got too much talent for Cleveland in this one. Colm, you talked about 90s throwbacks, something of a 70s throwback here. Packers at Steelers. One anemic offense against another anemic offense here, and one you talked about the Browns being statistically the best defense in the NFL. On the eye test, the Steelers have got to be one of the best defenses because they have to be right now. It's the only way that the Pittsburgh are winning games. A remarkable stat that I came across this week: the Steelers have been outgained by every single one of the teams they have played this season, and yet they're 5-3. That's never been done in the history of the NFL over a similar sample size of games. No team has ever had such a bad run of being outgained by another team's offense and yet still managed to pull out more than half its wins. Unbelievable credit to Mike Tomlin and unbelievable credit to that Steelers defense. I said that, I was laughing the other week saying, this reminded me of the 2006 Bears. People kept saying it was unsustainable, and yet they kept finding ways to win defensively without much on offense. But even the Bears 2006 offense was better than what the Steelers have put up to date. I still think the Steelers will win this one at home. I'm going to go first on this one and say it's a Pittsburgh win. But I can't say that with a huge degree of confidence. And the freaking Steelers have foxed me every time. Every time I picked against them, they've gone and won. So this time I'm jumping on the Pittsburgh bandwagon at home. I think they'll win this one.
I mean, with you picking them, Connor, as I said, they've gone against you. Maybe I should revise what I'm about to say. You could make the obvious joke here in terms of 90s throwbacks that surely this is Cher's belief and life after love, because maybe that's what the Packers are looking at. But you know, both teams have managed to get wins. You talked about the magic of Mike Tomlin, so you could look at it maybe as M people's moving on up. Or perhaps this is more Billy Ray Cyrus and Achy Breaky Heart, because my goodness, neither of these two teams are easy on the eye. They make it really difficult. And I do think I was a little bit surprised that the Packers didn't look to add somebody to the receiving room at the trade deadline. I think they could have added somebody on a pretty cheap deal, just on a rental, and I think it would have helped out some of those young receivers. They beat the Rams last week, but that was a Rams team quarterbacked by Brett Rippon, and I've seen enough of that in the past to know they weren't going anywhere. I think the Steelers...
He's no Mark Rippon.
I think the Steelers at home will be too much for the Packers. This could be one of the lower scoring games of the weekend, but Magical Mike Tomlin gets another win under his belt for me.
Colm said Billy Ray there, didn't he? I just right away immediately think of Billy Ray in Trading Places, and that film was, I think, was done in 1983-84. Well, like the Steelers defense this year is playing similar kind of traits to that old style Steelers defense that we saw in the past, and for that reason, I'm going to continue the trend of picking the Steelers, because defensively is what, for me, is what's keeping them alive this season. I can't buy into this record because we've seen enough of the Kenny Pickett experience so far. And maybe we'll be completely wrong on field. I don't think Aiden will be filled because he has Kenny Pickett as his MVP and he has the Steelers in the Super Bowl. So maybe, judging by the nature of his pick so far this season, he'll be right. But they'll win because there's too many inefficiencies for me in that Packers offense. We saw it last week. Despite the victory, it took them a long time to get that game put away against a Rams team that were missing the quarterback, which is kind of alluded to there. So I'll roll with the Steelers. It's not a game that really floats my boat, as they say.
Well, we might then stick with you, Brian, because there's a game at the tail end of our first segment here that might float everybody's boat, because you got the old Joe Burrow and the man who looks very much like he might be the new Joe Burrow, certainly in the way he played last week. It's Texans at Bengals, and Bengals red hot right now, and Texans not too far behind based on last week's showing. How do you see this one panning out?
Yeah, we spoke on Tuesday about that great sketch of Joe Burrow saying what's different to a few weeks ago, and he said run, I can run now. Well, he might have to do a lot of running on Sunday, because it looks like both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are both going to be ruled out for this game, which for me kind of brings this game right back to an even keel type of game. I think the line on it is 7 points, which is essentially a touchdown game for the Bengals. And it's probably a fair reflective of where both sides are. Both sides are going in the right direction, but ultimately the Bengals are a team we expect to see in the Super Bowl. I know you have both selected them to be there. This is a tight one now. If those two guys are out, it makes a world of a difference. Burrow, you can't go against Burrow, really, can you? Like, CJ Stroud had a fantastic game. I saw Dobbs was announced as the player of the week, which is quite surprising, bearing in mind. Can't get that.
He took a safety on his first play. Like, I know it's a great story. He hadn't practiced with them, but I did raise an eyebrow at that when I thought that's playing into narrative fallacy. How could you not give it to CJ Stroud? Like, what more does the guy need to do?
Absolutely. Bearing in mind he's a rookie as well, putting up those numbers. I think the Bengals defense will find a way to scupper CJ Stroud this week. I don't think he'll have as fruitful a day as in which he had last weekend against the Bucs defense that didn't know whether to blitz or go zone or go man to man. I'm not sure the Bengals offense will be as flourishing as we've seen recently, but I will side with the Bengals just to win, and I think it'll be a real close one at home.
Brian, I would tend to agree with your point around T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. If both of those guys are there, I actually don't see it being close at all, to be frank. Well and all as the Texans have played offensively last week, I think in the absence of Higgins and Chase, that makes it a little bit more interesting. Bear in mind, for all that we've talked about CJ Stroud and that incredible win, they also conceded 37 points to the Bucs. Like, Baker Mayfield was cooking in that game as well, thanks to this useless Texans secondary. And this is the last team you want to be playing if you've got the kind of secondary that the Texans have. One of the interesting things about the Bengals' performance last week, though, was Burrow hit 8 different receivers for 25 yards plus. 7 of the 8 had at least 25 yards. He's got options like Irv Smith and Drew Sample. They're bringing their tight ends more into the game. They're going to have to do that, obviously, and that has been an area where the Texans have been soft enough. We talked about how Schultz was the kind of bet noir of the Bucs, and that helped them out last week. Then the other end, Cade Otton was ripping them up and finished with 2 touchdowns himself. I wouldn't think for 1 minute that the Bengals will have passed notice on that one. And no better man than Burrow to take advantage of them. And as you say, that Bengals defense, we talked about them week in, week out under Lou Anarumo. Strong and with playmakers at every single level. Cam Taylor-Britt and Mike Hilton are particularly standouts in terms of the defensive backs. I think it's the line is about right. I think it's Bengals by a score and not much more than that. Colin.
I mean, this one for me, this is Stardust. Music sounds better with you, because with CJ Stroud and Joe Cool, the NFL is an infinitely better place. These are 2 QBs who I could watch over and over again. I mean, the poise in the pocket, the escapability, every single play, they have the potential to make magic happen. I think CJ Stroud has just been so impressive, and none of this is a fluke. I mean, what he is doing with that Texans team as a rookie is truly phenomenal. Burrow looks back to his best, and ultimately, I think that Big Lou and Anarumo will probably have enough. The Bengals have to keep winning because of the hole that they dug themselves in. And I think they know, even with the players that are out, they know. And yeah, I agree with Joe Burrow in ways, right? That, the Super Bowl window exists as long as he's there to an extent. But the window is more open, some seasons than others. And I think it is wide open right now, as long as they can get to the dance. And in order to do that, they're going to have to keep winning. I'm going to pick them. But I do think, I don't, a couple of months ago, this would have been an absolute shock if the Texans were to turn them over. I don't think it would be a shock at all now. I just think that the Bengals need this more, and I think their defense is further along. It's a fully developed defense. The Texans, Colin, you rightly point out, the secondary still needs to add pieces. I think D'Amico Ryans and his staff have done a great job, but I think next offseason they will look to add 1 or 2 pieces on offense, 1 or 2 pieces on defense, and they could be a real handful. They will be a real handful this year, but it's probably a year too soon. So the Bengals in this one for me.
Yeah, I tell you what, if the Texans do pull it out, you can close the book on CJ Stroud as offensive rookie of the year and probably D'Amico Ryans as coach of the year. I think they're both there or thereabouts once the voting and that one happens. Right, that is our first section of game preview and picks, brought to you by Ruepoint, demonstrating the value of global PR and comms. You can see how Ruepoint can help your business at ruepoint.com. Into their second segment of games, we move, Brian, with 49ers at Jags. And interesting because both of these teams are off buys and in very different circumstances. The 49ers on a 3-game slide, the Jags on a 5-game winning streak. They probably didn't want to get to the bye in one sense. Either this is Doug Peterson and the Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence picking up where they left off, or it's Kyle Shanahan having figured it out during the bye week and the 49ers reinvigorate the early season form they showed.
It's been a bit of a disservice to the Jags this week, bearing in mind the run there, which they're on, because everybody's kind of not necessarily calling this a get-right game for the Niners, but everyone just assumes at some stage the Niners are going to come off this slide, which is now potentially going to be 4 games if they come out the wrong side of this. But, I mean, this is back to the point you made earlier, Connor. We've blown trumpet over a couple of teams this season, only to have our pants pulled down very quickly. I think the Jags are in a really strong position. I mean, bearing in mind where they are in terms of the seeding as well. We're talking about the Ravens, we're talking about the Chiefs, and they're well within the mix. And they've got a very good run of stretch in terms of games. I know they have the Ravens to come, and they got the Bengals at home as well on a Monday night. So there's some huge games ahead, but you can't argue that they haven't turned things around and they're really playing well. I'm going to go Jags. I think this trend of Jags winning continues, and I think the 49ers have another difficult week to get off this slide. I think going into Jacksonville, having that 2 weeks to prepare for the Niners are still slowly getting players back. It looks like Deebo Samuel's going to play this week, but I think the Jags seem to have everybody available to them right now. They're a lot in a better position player-wise. I'm going to stick with the Jags on this one. Home victory for me.
Colm, you said it many times that the 49ers have the best starters in the league. Emphasis authors own in this instance. They sometimes look like a really, really well-engineered piece of technology that only operates under laboratory conditions, and it hasn't been lab-like conditions for the past couple of weeks, and they haven't liked it.
No, and the concern for me, I suppose, is Trent Williams, and is he right? But let's face it, this is a game that should be in prime time, and why the league chose not to flex and drop this in because at least on paper. This is the Out Here Brothers boom, 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 because both of these sides have, the talent to create huge plays. And I think what's fascinating, Connor, you're right. I do believe that the 49ers are the best starters. But I think Trevor Lawrence has been really interesting in the way that he quarterbacks, because he is a quarterback. He is capable of pushing the ball down the field at times. He's capable of kind of dinking and dunking if needs be. I don't know if he has a preference. He seems to be a guy who is really good at processing and seeing what's available on any particular play. And if it is the intermediate, he'll go for that. If it's drop it off, it's not like he's always looking for one or the other. He's not always looking to push the ball. Whereas, that tends to be, say, Josh Allen's kind of go-to, right? As Josh looks for the big play. Some QBs always want to kind of drop it off, get it out quickly, get the yards after catch. Trevor, on the other hand, is kind of just processes what he sees in front of him. And I think that's different than a lot of other QBs. I think that one thing that makes the Jags really dangerous, right, is he has that ability. Now, he has taken more sacks this year, but he generally has this capability about him. Their O-line has struggled. And I suppose, I think with the 49ers having the bookends now in Chase and in Bosa, so you're not going to be able to double team Bosa in the same way that you were. I think I have this as a coin flip game. And I think if you run it, probably because of the starters, I think maybe you run it 100 times. Maybe the 49ers win 51 times. But I just don't think Trent Williams is right. And I think without Trent Williams, being 100%. I think that's a real area where they struggle. They just don't look right without him. And if he does go out there, I just don't think he's going to be 100%. So I'm going to go Jags in this.
Yeah, I can't believe we're all going to go Jags here. I really thought we'd have more
Oh,
contention,
no.
but
Sorry,
we've obviously put the kiss of death on them now, because if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago, if you'd asked me a couple of weeks ago to call this game, I would have said, oh yeah, not 49ers all day long, but I would have been confident in the coaching and confident in the talent to get it done. If you're asking me which quarterback I trust more right now, obviously it's Trevor Lawrence, and which coach I trust more right now, it's Doug Peterson. I think he's getting a lot more out of the talent at his disposal than Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers coaching staff are getting out of the talent at their disposal. We've talked a lot about how good DeMeco Ryans has been at the Texans. We haven't talked enough about the hole he's left behind in San Francisco, and it's, you know, we kind of looked at the Chase Young trade and went, wow, now the 49ers have Chase Young as well. But the second part of that was they kind of need him. And you wouldn't have thought that they would need to add a piece like that. But, you know, the Jags are the team that have more takeaways than any other team in the league. The Jags are the team that are getting after quarterbacks and doing what you expect to see from San Francisco. You know, we saw the Bengals absolutely slice and dice that vaunted 49ers defense, and they're back to being a defense-led team. You know, you give Doug Peterson an extra week to plan as well. And this is kind of, you know, a little bit of the Kyle Shanahan experience too. Good and all as he's been and influential as he is, when he comes up against a true master, he often doesn't look like the coach that you expect him to be. And, you know, he's been outfoxed by Andy Reid and by others in those big spots and in those key games. And I actually think the Jaguars will pull this one out.
Connor, just a few worrying stats, which me and Colin delved through there last week on the way to Frankfurt. I think we spoke Niners are down by 8+ points in the game. Kyle Shanahan has never recovered to win one of those. And when they're down by +3 points going into the fourth quarter, he's only won 1 of 31 games. The 49ers play from ahead and they let teams chase them. But where they get into a situation where they're chasing the game, it doesn't seem to come out and be as fruitful as the way it is. So it'd be interesting to see the dynamic of this game and who comes out, you know, bearing in mind they're both coming off the bye week, who comes out sharp, who comes out early, and who gets themselves in a position that they're winning the game going into halftime, even into the third quarter. It'd be interesting to see the dynamic of this one, how quickly one team gets out to a start.
Colin, in Minnesota, we have the Offensive Player of the Week, Josh Dobbs, who through no fault of his own, robbed CJ Stroud of that award. Let's be fair. And a rematch, of course, of a famous playoff game, which gave us the Minneapolis Miracle. Any such luck this weekend? Does Josh Dobbs keep that amazing story going, or is it New Orleans to take it?
Well, I have this is live and joys don't stop moving, because both of these teams, it seems like since they the Saints, obviously, since they moved on from Breeze, it's kind of been a QB okie dokie. And for the Vikings, last week's situation, I think the Saints are in a great position in many ways right now. They're probably one of, if not the healthiest team in the entirety of the NFL. They're in a division where nobody seems to want to win it. And the only issue is they don't seem to be able to get out of their own way at times. Like, how many points should they have scored last week against the Bears? But they didn't do it. For the Vikings, I mean, I think, again, they show that they're going in the right direction. Okay, I think Kevin O'Connell, I've talked about it. I think he's a great coach. I think Brian Flores is a great coach. I think if they can get the right personnel, I think this will be a really tough game to call, because I do think that what Flores will do to Derek Carr will make life really difficult for him, and he'll put Carr under pressure. But I worry that kind of after that emotional win last week, there has to be something of a kind of inevitable kind of come down. And the Saints defense is probably good enough still to do that. So for right now, I'm going to go with the Saints to get the win in this.
Yeah, the thing about the Josh Dobbs experience, right? And we talk about how he's bounced around a few teams. You talk about how he ends up in Minnesota in a crazy situation, basically nearly coming off the plane straight onto the field without even being introduced to his teammates. As we talked about on studio, having to practice his cadence with the center on the sideline very quickly before going in. Kevin O'Connell, and for all the Josh Dobbs praise rightly heaped on him, Kevin O'Connell finding a way to coach his quarterback through that game is one of the great under pressure coaching jobs. You got to literally explain the plays to the quarterback in running and get him through the game. Josh Dobbs obviously improvises, does a lot with his legs. But there's a reason why Josh Dobbs was traded mid-season. There's a reason why he's bounced around a lot of teams. He's not the guy, and he's not going to be the guy. He's Mr. Right now for the Vikings because they were and are in desperate need of someone, and that's why he's there. I think the Saints, to your point, Colm, I watched that game against the Bears last week. Obviously, it's amazing how they kept the Bears in it for so long. They had 5 turnovers and it still ends up being a 1-score game. Like that's really poor. They should have put them away long before they did. And in the end, the Bears had 2 chances to march down the field and tie it up, which should never have been the case. If they're going to be that sloppy against the Vikings, then they are going to go home with a loss. I don't, however, think that they will be. To your point on Flores, I think we could devote a whole program to what he's done this season. I mean, we expected him to make a difference in that Vikings defense. I have to say, and I'll hold my hands up, I didn't expect it to be this quickly. I was kind of banking on that. It just takes a while to bed in a new defensive scheme. What he's done is he just looked, again, as good coaches do, looked at the talent at his disposal, looked at what he doesn't have, didn't go in and say, well, this is the scheme I play and this is the way I want us to play. He just figured out how to get the most out of the guys around him. He's throwing 7 defensive backs on at a time. He's sending 6-man pressure. Some of it is kamikaze stuff, but it is really confusing quarterbacks and it's really confusing opposite offensive coordinators, and it's paying dividends for the Vikings and it's keeping them in games where they shouldn't be. They've been the scrappiest team arguably in the NFL this year. I really enjoyed watching them, and I think a lot of people are getting on that Vikings bandwagon wherever it goes, and it likely doesn't end up in the playoffs. I'm hemming and hawing here, but ultimately I think New Orleans will go home with the win. I don't say that with any great confidence, I have to say. Brian, what way do you see it for your own perspective?
Another worrying trend when we're all going to select the same team. But my narrative on this is, and I think Colm slightly touched on, is had he not played last week, Dobbs, I genuinely believe we would still be asking the question. He's only got a week to get ready for this game, get himself up to speed in terms of what the Vikings would expect from him. That's too much of an ask going into a game against a top 10 defense in the league who has the joint most takeaways of 18 interceptions in the league. The Saints defense, since that, I know, and again, they played the Bears last week. The previous week, they did a good number on the Colts, who had been playing well, quite, offensively, but they seem to have slightly turned the corner over the past 2 weeks, albeit against teams that you would expect them to do well against. But though that number stands out for me as 18 takeaways, that strikes me as a team that will go after Dobbs on Sunday, blitz the hell out of him, and hopefully he turns over the ball. And I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. I think the Saints get out of Minneapolis with a victory.
Right, Titans at Bucks is our next game. I suppose it's about time I ventured out and stuck my neck out before anyone else. So I might kick off with this one. Will Levis, of course, now the confirmed starter, had a sensational debut, throwing 4 touchdowns. Everybody wondering where they'd been hiding this Greek god up until now. He's a pretty impressive specimen on the field, and that arm is something else. However, where they had most success against the Steelers in particular was on the ground, and King Henry looked like something of the old King Henry in that game, finally notching above the 4 yards per carry mark, causing the Steelers a lot of trouble. Obviously, they have to put the ball in Will Levis's hands down the stretch there as they're trying to come back into the game, and ultimately Quan Alexander gets the pick for the Steelers and prevents that comeback effort when actually Levis might have been better off throwing the ball towards Nick Westbrook-Akina, who he had open on an in route. But that's what rookie quarterbacks will do, right? I think this Titans team, now has a bit of life breathed into it. As we were saying, Brian, watching them live in London a couple of weeks ago, it just looks so pedestrian on offense at times. You really were wondering how they were going to, now admittedly against the Ravens, make any headway. But I still think they're a team that I'd have confidence in making life difficult for most teams that they're going to face. The Bucs put up 37 points against the Texans last weekend, but they conceded 39. And, CJ Stroud, albeit that will leave us, is no CJ Stroud, or certainly hasn't had the chance to prove himself to be just yet. I actually think this might be the Titans' first road win of the season. I, again, don't say that with any huge amount of confidence, but I think it's going to be a Titans win on the road. Brian?
In a week where we're talking about teams tanking, potentially tanking because they need a quarterback in the future, and yet there's been very little said about the Bucs. They're 3-5, and the Titans are 3-5, and the Will Levis situation looks like they've, they have their answer. But for the Bucs, do they have their answer? Despite Baker Mayfield's great performance last weekend, I don't believe they do. They've lost 4 in a row. I find it difficult to think that defense, because they still have a lot of good players there, can play as bad as they did last week. I think the Bucs aren't at that stage of the season where they're looking to the future in terms of what they're going to do next off-season. I still think they feel in a division that despite other teams winning, they're a couple of games back. I think they get back on track. I think they win this game. They're 3-5. I think they don't see themselves in that situation where they're looking ahead too far ahead in terms of the offseason or anything. I think the Bucs defensively can play as bad as they did last week. And they're going up against another rookie, obviously, this week. But they're at home. I think they'll have enough. I'll go Bucs and the Titans road losses continue, and their road woes are just, they can't get over.
Right, finally, we're not seeing eye to eye. We've broken the full house trend. Colin, Bucs or Titans for you?
This one, I saw something of a coin toss game, and I think that you've both made compelling points as to why either team could get the victory. I'm gonna go and say that I think the Bucs will edge it. Just because I don't envisage them losing 4 on the bounce, and I'm interested to see what Will Levis can continue to do. I don't think Baker, despite Connor, you rightly point out, he was able to put up the points last week, but he's not the long-term answer there. So the Bucs will have to figure that out. Whereas for the Titans, I think that they are hoping that Will Levis is the long-term answer. But I think some fans maybe got over their skis a little bit after his debut. I think we need to see him continue to develop and show that, he's not just a kind of a trick play merchant. I expect a very close game. I think the fact that it's Vrabel against Todd Bowles will be an interesting one, but I have the Bucs just edging it at home.
Right, Brian, Falcons at Cardinals is an interesting affair because, and we talked about this in our preseason previews, at a certain point in time, Kyler Murray was going to be fit. But did the Cardinals really want to have to play him? Right now, they're sitting pretty with potentially the number 1 overall pick in the draft. On the one hand, they're happy to have Kyler Murray back on one level. On the other hand, they don't necessarily want him to go and start going on a winning spree here and take them out of the pole position.
Yeah, but I don't know what they can do this offseason. You look at that contract. That contract is not anything they can get out of, this offseason or even potentially the offseason after. There's like a cap of mad money, ridiculous. Like they've literally gone to town on this contract, and which was bizarre in the first place, bearing in mind the stipulations that were put into that contract around this off-field stuff. But I think they will get a lift from him because they have been playing quite well. I know over the course of the last few weeks they're going to regress back to what we expected. But I think this will give them a bit of a lift. And for the Falcons right now, they seem like Falcons are a bit of in a quandary right now because they've decided Ritter's not the answer. But yet, judging by what we saw from Taylor Heineke last week, and we discussed it on Tuesday, we thought he'd give them the lift, and that didn't really materialize. Bearing in mind the number of interceptions. I mean, for the Falcons to be contending for this division, they have to have this game. But I'm going to side with the Cardinals. I think to get, like Colin refers to last week, the Raiders and that kind of lift. I think Kyler Murray can give this team a lift, and I think when he's on his game and if he's 100% fit, he can be an effective quarterback against a defense which is struggling to stop the run, and he is a very effective run pass option. Never mind being a quarterback. So, shock. Is it a shock? There's only 1 point on the handicap line. That kind of says it all for this game. I'll go Cards.
Brian, you say for the Falcons to be competitive, they have to have this one. For the Falcons to be competitive, they just have to kind of hover slightly below 500. That's all it takes in the NFC South these days. It's such a
true,
lamentably poor division.
Yeah.
But I look at the Falcons and the use of Bijan Robinson says everything about where they're at right now. 11 carries last week. And yeah, I know he spilled a fumble, but he's a rookie running back. You know, you move away from him in the way that they do, or you're not giving him the carries. He hasn't quite been at the level that he was at in London, but I just don't like the way Arthur Smith uses his players. And we talked about how he kind of lets people go cold and moves things around and constantly changes it up, meddles and messes. You know, he is the NFL equivalent of Ranieri as the Tinker Man, and it's not paying dividends for the Falcons right now. We talked about that drive last week where they scored the go-ahead touchdown before the Vikings came back, and that Josh Dobbs Cinderella story completed itself. Where they just brutalized up the middle, 11 straight runs, and you know that's the function of who they've got at quarterback as well, right? But it's also Smith finds something he can do well and then moves away from it very quickly, and it becomes a very frustrating watch at times. I still find it very difficult to see how the Cardinals top them. I think the Falcons, to your point, Brian, will feel like they really kind of need to have this one. They don't want to lose pace either, you know, joking as I was about the NFC South. And I think they will just about go in and take care of it on the road. Colin, what do you reckon?
Do you remember that OMC song, How Bizarre? And that I think is both of these franchises. Destination Unknown. The Falcons make no sense whatsoever. And if anyone watching or listening on the podcast hasn't heard Arthur Smith speak for 5 minutes about Bijan Robinson and why he isn't getting touches and say absolutely nothing, I mean, it was complete waffle, as Eamon Dunphy would say. It was ridiculous. And when he stands at the podium in recent weeks, unless this is some sort of kind of avant-garde kind of performance piece, it's not making a whole lot of sense. Nothing he's saying. I mean, this is the guy who stood up 1 week and said, "You don't know what you're not seeing it. You don't watch film. That Desmond Ridder is the guy." And days later, he's changing his tune completely. You're right, I think, in terms of the comparison to Ranieri and the Tinkerman, but I think it's worse. And I don't think players know where, you know, they stand. And it's like sometimes, you know, Kyle Shanahan gets accused of wanting to be the smartest guy in the room. Arthur Smith takes that to a new level. I mean, the meme-ification, like tight end 2 or throwing to tight end 3 while tight end 1 blocks. All of that is the case. I just think that, you know, he has overcomplicated it, and I think he is in real danger of losing the locker room there. I think they have some brilliant talent, but Taylor Heineke is not the answer. I mean, Taylor Heineke is a guy who comes in when your starter goes down injured and you just, you know, you need him to come in. But like, we know what he is. He's not going to be able to keep the bus on track. And so for that reason, I'm doing a couple of things, I think, this week that I haven't done previously. I picked the Panthers probably for the first and maybe the last time this season, and I'm picking the Cardinals for the first and last time this season. I wanted it to work for the Falcons. I picked the Falcons to win the division, but it hasn't worked, and Arthur Smith shows no signs to me of learning from his mistakes.
Brian, Giants at Cowboys. This is a revenge game for the Giants, obviously wanting to make up for an early season embarrassment, and Tommy DeVito was the man tasked with taking down the Cowboys in Arlington.
Giants on the road. to arrive at the stadium in one piece. Well, they'll come out there in any other piece thereafter is probably very unlikely. I kind of feel sorry for the kid. Like, he's an undrafted rookie. He's been essentially thrown in at the deep end in the game against the Jets, where he essentially wasn't allowed to throw the ball. And he did quite well in the second half last week, but the game was over, so you have to wonder how well he did. With the Raiders completely easing off his completion ratio last week was decent. He threw a touchdown. He's had a week. I could argue he's doing the Dobbs scenario. He's had a week to get used to the system. And by all accounts, they had a closed shop meeting yesterday between him, Dable, the quarterback coach, and Mike Kafka, and made sure he knew and understood every play in the playbook. So you would expect him to be comfortable enough going into this game. The reality is, no matter who would the quarterback for the Giants this weekend, bearing in mind Evan Neal is gone again, not necessarily saying he's having a good season, but there's no continuity to the offensive line. It's going to be another moving around the players, and it's just not been consistent for any quarterback back there all throughout the season. It's one of the biggest issues they've had this year. And you're going against arguably one of the best defenses in the league in Dallas, where they've put such a beat down on a lot of teams defensively. I think they've had pick sixes in nearly every home game this season. Did it to the Patriots, did it to the Rams last day out. There's been a number of different teams that have found it very difficult. I can't see anything but a Cowboys win. And I think for the Giants, it's very much about playing competitive, playing tough, presenting themselves in a manner that the league aren't questioning, but ultimately get to the end of the season and be in the sweepstakes for a new quarterback.
Yeah, nothing I disagree with there, Brian. I have to say, this is the kind of game that the Cowboys tend to win. They take care of business against the weaker teams in the league. That's how they pad out their record and get to the ball game. And we'll see if there's any more in them this season than there has been in previous seasons. I think Dak has looked really good in recent weeks, to be fair, as well. It's not just defensively where they look dangerous. The connection with CeeDee Lamb is obviously, CeeDee Lamb's hitting career highs over the last couple of weeks in terms of receptions, in terms of yardage. And I don't see that being any different, unfortunately, against the Giants from your perspective. I think it's a fairly straightforward Cowboys victory. The line, I think, is 16. It's Cowboys minus 16. That's a 2-possession plus game.
Yeah, 17-point victory for the Cowboys is what the expectation is from the bookie. 17 plus. So that says it all, doesn't it?
Colin, what do you reckon?
I find Mr. O'Leary's comments interesting, given that the criticism that another NFC East team faced some years ago for looking to improve their draft position. Funny how things go, isn't it? Look, I think if there was a year to end up picking high, this is probably the year. I think for the Giants, it is about it's all about next year. It's not they're not there. And the only way that they can get a win, the only thing you'd look at if you're hoping to get a win is that this is a Cowboys team who lost to the Cardinals earlier in the season, that have an awful tendency to look beyond teams, that lost to a really poor Broncos team that got spanked in Jerry's world, had their pants pulled down in front of Jerry. So this Cowboys team can have that sort of game where they look beyond the opposition, and famously, this comes from Jerry himself. Brian will remember well, and the wry smile I'm sure in his face, when Jerry put the tickets in the Cowboys locker room, and poor Wade Phillips had to pick up the pieces for Jerry's error there. I can't see the Giants doing it, but beware hubris, Cowboys, beware. It should be them though.
Connor, I remember the Broncos. I remember both games in which Colin was referring to. Obviously, the Broncos game a couple of years ago, a couple of days after, in which they moved on Von Miller in the trades to the Rams at the time, and that division all around game in early 2008. If the Giants' defense was to play at the level in which they played against the Jets, I know it was Zach Wilson, bear in mind, but the way they were playing in that kind of period of 3 weeks, if they were to go in there and play at that level, they could hang around for 3 quarters. But ultimately, if you can't do anything offensively, what hope have you got?
Yeah, I have to say, to your point, it shouldn't be hard to motivate the Giants for this one. Like, the Cowboys expect to run roughshod over you. This is your divisional rival. Is a little bit of a show us your pride, rabble rousing speech here. I'm sure will be the case. As you can say, Kayvon Thibodeau shows up in Kayvon Thibodeau form, and they do the things that they've been able to do at times this season defensively. Not least the other week against the Jets. there may be some hope, and to your point, Colin, maybe if they keep it close, maybe if they keep it closer than the Cowboys expect it to be, nerves start to apply, and who knows, they could do a Steelers like let's win without our offense, but it's a stretch. It's a big stretch, I have to say.
I'd still rather win though. Never mind any drafts. I'd rather win. Every fan should want their team to win.
My musical.
Well, you ain't paying any less for the tickets if a team is tanking either, which is the thing I'd like to point out.
My musical comp for this one was more money, more problems, because I think that applies to both of these franchises.
Mace's finest hour. Right, that's the end of our second segment, and we move into our third segment of game where we kick off with Lions at Chargers. Chargers are, Colin, as we said the other day, hanging in there. The AFC West isn't quite beyond them. The wild card isn't quite beyond them. The Lions took a hell of a beating from the Ravens, as we talked about that first statement win from the Ravens the other week. They're now off their bye. They got back on track against the Raiders and consigned Josh McDaniels to history in the process. This is a spicy enough game, I have to say. What way do you see it going?
I have this one, a Karina's temptation, because both of these teams, I think, lead you into that. You think, oh, maybe they've turned a corner, or the Lions are for real. I think the Chargers have beaten bad teams, and I still think Justin Herbert is a very good QB, but I just don't believe that they have the weapons to live with the with good teams, and that's been a huge problem. I think they've made poor choices in the draft. I think that they needed a speedster this year. Instead, they went for another big-bodied wide receiver. Mike Williams has always struggled to stay fit throughout his career, and when he is on the field, he makes a difference to them. But all too often, he is not there. So they have flattered to deceive for me. The Lions need a get-right game. They really need to get back on track and a road win. Now, they've shown that they can win on the road in the AFC already this season, and I think that they will do enough to get the victory here. I think for the Chargers, I just don't think they have enough, and I think there will be, for the Spanos, who famously don't like moving on from contracts generally, I think there's going to be some really tough decisions to be taken at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm going to go Lions here, and I don't find it too difficult to make the decision. I just think they're the better team. I think that Ravens game notwithstanding, that they've made progress in every regard this season. I think if they're not Super Bowl contenders, they're definitely going to sew up the NFC North, and I think they're more than good enough to take care of business here. I think the Chargers have looked slightly better defensively in recent weeks, which is interesting. They're getting after quarterbacks. They're ratcheting up the pressure. But again, to your point, Colin, there's really not an awful lot for Justin Herbert to throw to, and he can only do so much. Prodigious though his talent is, and this is not a defense that's going to give you a lot of change, and they'll know what to do to lock down WR1. And after that, it's ... from a Chargers perspective. Brian, what's your verdict?
Well, you assume you know where I'm going to go on this one, don't you? Well, how's
your favorite Chargers?
I am going to go with the Chargers to win this game. I've been quietly impressed with their defense over the past few weeks. Actually, if you look at their numbers, like a reflexive defense has been very leaky throughout the course of the season, but they still have done. I thought they did quite well on Monday night, bearing in mind. Okay, again, we just keep saying Zach Wilson, but they did. They turned over at significant times of the game. Special teams turned up over the last few weeks. Doesn't always have to be on Herbert to win the game. I think the defense has done a little bit better of late to allow just now not to be having the games in which we expect. I think he only had something in the region of 150 to 160 yards last week. But again, against a defense that was marquee in the Jets. But I don't think the Lions defense is at that level. They have been playing well, but against the Raiders a few weeks ago on the Monday Night Football, in which they won by 12 points, the Raiders hung around for a long time, and they moved the ball on them for different parts of the game, only for key plays and key moments in the game where they were sacked. But they didn't get the ball up and down at times. And I think the Chargers still have enough in them offensively to cause trouble to this Lions defense. I'm going to go with the surprise and the shock. I'm going to select the Chargers to win. I've been on this Chargers train for quite a while now, guys. No, I haven't. But this week I am.
Right, interesting. Right, our next game up, Commanders at Seahawks. If the Commanders were tanking, or anybody thought that they might be headed down that route column, having traded Sweat and Young, or Young and Sweaty, that message didn't get through to Ron Rivera and his team, who showed up last week. Seahawks, on the other hand, I wouldn't say they didn't show up. It wasn't a no-show. They were just completely outclassed by the Ravens. Different standard of opposition for Seattle this week, though. I wouldn't call the Commanders a get-right game. I would never say they're an easy out, because they certainly are not. This is kind of one the Seahawks have to pick the momentum back up. But will they manage to do so against Washington?
Well, groove is in the heart, and the Seahawks need to get back into the groove. The Commanders aren't tanking because Ron Rivera is coaching for his career. If this goes badly, Ron probably doesn't get another head coaching gig, and he has been doing everything he possibly can to ensure that he remains in situ. Obviously, new ownership came in. They ended up, I think, got ratified literally weeks before the season started, so they were never going to make big changes there. But we know that a lot of times new owners want to put their own stamp on that. So you've heard Ron in recent weeks continuously point to Sam Howell being the future, and we think we found our guy, and he wants to get at least another season to get it right. And I think in terms of moving off of Chase and Sweat, I mean, this is a team who had drafted 4 DL guys high, so they were always going to have to make decisions on them. Listening to the talk around it, it would seem that they were always looking to move on from Chase Young. Even though he was much more productive this year, things haven't been right there for a long time, and there were always issues, I suppose, they felt around his attitude. Now you go to a winning team in the 49ers, you're kind of in a prove yourself situation, so he either steps up or he doesn't. But with Sweat, it sounds like they just got an offer that they felt was too good to turn down. They have some real talent. Dotson has taken a step up in the past few weeks. We know he is capable. I think they will be feisty, but I think going to Seattle is very different. And I think the Seahawks know that they need to perform. And so I have the Seahawks and Pete Carroll and Geno getting back on track.
Brian, you and I have both had our doubts in recent weeks about Geno, and bad Geno can really let you down at key moments, and he has done so over the past couple of weeks. Does he get right here, and does he enjoy the comforts of home against the Commanders?
I think they do, but I think there is serious pressure on this team despite the record and despite where they are within the division. Last week's offensive performance was the worst performance in which they've had since 2017. I mean, Kenneth Walker only ran for 16 yards in the game. I mean, that's minuscule for a running back, but it just shows the nature of how dominant the Ravens defense was. But I still think defensively for the Seahawks, we should see a better game this week as well in terms of what they allowed to go up and down on them last week. And Sam Howell, unfortunately, that sack situation hasn't improved. The offensive line, he was sacked 3 times last week, despite the win in New England. I think he'll be sacked quite a bit on Sunday. I think defensively for the Seahawks, it's a bounce back game for them as well. I think the Seahawks get out there, and I think it's more so around the defense as opposed to Geno lightening up.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't think you keep a Pete Carroll team down for too long. I think you expect a response from Carroll's teams, as they've always historically come back stronger when they get punched in the mouth like that. I think they're more than good enough, at least on paper, you would say, to take the Commanders out. And I think they're a very different prospect at home. I think this is it's not the ideal matchup for them coming off that beatdown, but it's certainly one where I think they can get right and get the W. Our Sunday night game, we talked about the paucity of some of the primetime fixtures and some of the better candidates among the games, which selfishly from a European perspective, I guess we're happier to see in the earlier window. But geez, Jets at Raiders is one only a mother could love, Colin.
Yeah, no, truly, the Cardinals are Cardinals. The Cardigans loveful begins. Dear, I fear we're facing a problem. Well, my goodness, fans are facing a problem this week, and while fans are facing problems with the primetime game, the Jets are facing a myriad problems. They this is one where their defense, if they had anyone other than Zach Wilson at QB, and perhaps Tommy DeVito, I would be saying that they would win this. I think the feel good factor, the real feel good factor for the Raiders will have dissipated a little bit. There won't be cigars in the locker room this week. But do you trust the Jets to be able to score any points, at all? They even the games where they have managed to, get it back. Like the Giants were really poor. The Broncos are really poor. I just struggle to see this. Now I struggle with the Raiders as well, which is why I cannot believe this is in prime time. As I say, selfishly from a European perspective, fantastic. But you're looking at it saying, like, where's the excitement in this? Where is it going to come from? And I just think that eventually, however good a defense is, they can only do so much when they're on the field repeatedly. And so for that reason, I'll go with the Raiders. But I'm disappointed as an NFL fan that the Jets, again, I've talked about it, didn't do anything at QB, and that this is the result that everyone's lumbered with this game in prime time.
Yeah, likewise, and I know we picked up on the way Robert Saleh handled the Zach Wilson thing, the issue again in his media availability after the game last week. But to be fair to one of the things he was saying, it's not all on Wilson. He for all the talk of the talent on this Jets team and most of it on the defensive end, they've added guys who are added more to keep Aaron Rodgers happy than because they're necessarily serious weapons. I mean, Alan Lazard is basically the second wide receiver on this team at the moment. I mean, he's not good enough to be WR2 anywhere. He wasn't good enough to be WR2 in Green Bay, where he left behind two rookies. And that's what Wilson has to throw to, apart from Garrett Wilson. Like, he's not overburdened with genius targets, to be fair to him. Lack of pocket presence and overambition in his throws and inability to use the one thing that he actually has, which is his legs, to get himself out of trouble, notwithstanding all of the things that will damn him or would have damned him anywhere else if the Jets weren't absolutely desperate. From a Raiders perspective, to take your Cardigans analogy a bit further, there's a little bit of similarity there in that there's a couple of standout hits and not much depth in the catalogue there as far as the Raiders are concerned. I think this is a relatively talent-poor roster where a couple of players are papering over the cracks. I do think they'll get a little bit more mileage from the dead cat bounce post McDaniels. I have to say, I think there's a serious relief rally ongoing there, and we saw the fruits of it first last weekend. I think that'll carry forward this weekend purely because of what you said. I just don't see how the Jets are going to put up enough points to win, and I think the Raiders have just about enough about them, even with O'Connell as quarterback, to pull out the win at home. Brian?
I can't argue with anything you just said, guys. It's pretty much where I was going with this. I think Antonio Pierce, whilst they're all re-energized and playing for him, I think they're also very fortunate in which they've landed on these two particular games, in which the Giants and the Jets, because after this, it gets really difficult to go on the road to Miami next week, and then they've come home and face the Chiefs. I think reality will quickly bite in a couple of weeks, and just what you said, Conor, around the particular roster in which they have, and despite Antonio Pierce being able to lift the life of everybody, their harsh reality is when you come up against better teams, they're going to be quickly exposed. But I don't think they'll be exposed this weekend because of the nature of what Columns alluded to, which is a really difficult offense, and which the Jets are working with in terms of the quarterback. And to your point, like, Jets fans were raving when Alan Lazard was signed, maybe more so because of the connection with Aaron Rodgers, but they're certainly not raving this week, because large parts of New York sports this week was around the disgruntlement of Lazard and how poor he has been since he's gone into the Jets. So, they've quickly realised he's not the player in which they expected. Raiders for me as well, I think. Devontae Adams, Jacobs, you're talking about rookie quarterback, but they've got players there. And Jacoby Myers has been a bright spot in a free agency signing this offseason. With all due respect to how they've played, he has been better than I expected. So, yeah, Raiders for me.
Right, our final game, the Monday night game, is Broncos at Bills. And, it's not necessarily a marquee fixture when you consider what we could have had if you had, for instance, Texans, Bengals in that window. But I have to say, Colin, I find this a very interesting game, because you've got two teams whose arrows seem to be trending in exactly the opposite direction. I think the Broncos over the last 5 games have looked an awful lot better. In fairness, there was a lot of improvement to be had, let it not be said. And the Bills, on the other hand, it's really not working. Allen is on a 5-game interception streak now. It's a while since he was clean. It's not all on him. There's a lot of blame to go around in Buffalo, but there's something just not clicking, and that gives the Broncos a chance on the road.
It does, no, certainly, but I did dub this one achy breaky heart, because Von Miller will face the Broncos, and there are certain players who you want to see them kind of be one team players, and ultimately the Broncos just weren't good enough to do that for Von. And the other thing why it's a little bit achy breaky is because Von hasn't looked like Von this year. He did last year. He really looked really impressive, and then the injury happened. Now we'll see if he can get back there. They desperately need him too, because they have missed out so many. The Broncos have definitely improved, like by conceding 70 points. That was as low as it could go. But then last time out, they beat the Chiefs, and you've had Sean Payton, as a result, has had time to scheme. And we know that on script, the Broncos have been really, really impressive. For me, the Bills' issues are, it is the defense. I can't put it on Josh Allen. I think he is doing his best, but at times he is trying too hard. And I suppose, you look at it, and ultimately the Bills, when the 1st of October, they put what a beatdown on the Dolphins, and they looked like the best team. And ever since then, it just seems to have all gone wrong. But they have done enough, right? They did enough to beat the Giants. They did enough to beat the Bucs. Okay, they lost to the Patriots, but that was a divisional game. I still would have them as favorites, and I still think that they will win this game. And that's not easy to say when I'm going to be up at 4 a.m. watching it. But I have if to be objective, the Bills should win it. I hope they don't. I hope the Broncos win it, and then the Bills have to pick up the pieces. But at home, the Bills should have enough.
Yeah, I come back to the Bills' DNA here. They've dropped a couple of bad ones this season, no mistake. I mean, it's kind of hard to figure that defense manages to lose to two of the worst offenses in the league, in the Jets minus Rodgers and the Patriots. That's a bit of a head scratcher, as you say, Colin. Then we saw the best of them when they put that beat down on the Dolphins, and we know what they're capable of. We also know they've suffered some key injuries defensively. Matt Milano's a massive loss. Tre'Davious White's a massive loss. And what we haven't really seen from them this season is that pressure with the front four. They were the best team in the league last year at getting pressure on the quarterback and creating sacks with their front four. They didn't have to blitz. They didn't have to bring extra guys because they were able to do so well up front. And we haven't seen the same version of the Bills this year. And that's been one of the key problems defensively for them. However, they've stacked wins so well over the last couple of years. We've talked about how, you can fixate too much on one or two bad losses. You can fixate on one or two of the playoff losses and not see the greater body of work that both players and coaching staff, albeit that obviously they've lost Leslie Fraser and Brian Daboll, and those were hard to paper over. And you're seeing some of the fruits of that over the last season and a half. But I think, notwithstanding the fact that I stand by that the Broncos are trending in the right direction, and that Peyton is getting something working there, and that defensively they've looked a hell of a lot better than in the kind of most recent 5-game stretch. They've been one of the better defenses in the NFL. I know you can look at you can slice and dice the statistics, as we were saying earlier on, and that is quite a small sample size. But I do take note of that trend, and I think this is going to be a better, closer game than it might have been a few weeks ago, certainly. But I do think it's an Orchard Park home stand for Buffalo ultimately.
Yeah, the Bills defense has been their shortcomings over the course of the last few weeks, in particular on the road. But Josh Allen was still 26 for 38 last weekend, 270 yards. I mean, he's still playing at a really strong level this season. He's carrying the team to large parts. You could say he's like, if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't be anywhere where they are in terms of the wins. So 3-0 at home in Orchard Park, and I do agree that the Broncos have turned a corner and they're going to make this game very difficult for them. But I asked the question, do I still trust Russell Wilson to ultimately win this game? Because that's what it's going to come down to. The defense can play well, but ultimately you're going to ask a quarterback to take advantage of this defense. And right now I'm still not sure if he can do that. So for that reason, I'll side Bills, but I think it'll be a lot tighter than people expect. I don't think this is going to be a runaway game on Monday Night Football in any way, shape or form. Bills just about.
All right, no lark in Orchard Park then. That is our Week 10 preview complete. And we'll have plenty more content for you. Sorry, Colin.
Yeah, no, just on the content. Had a really great chat with Steve O'Rourke, all in relation to the Raiders, but wider kind of discussion in relation to ownership, in relation to the running of teams, in relation to, I suppose, fandom and the way fans look at it, and delved into the deep and murky world of the media as well. And that will go out on Saturday and is well worth a listen. A great conversation with Steve.
Great stuff, Colin. Check that out wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll ask you, please, as well, if you could like or subscribe too. It makes it easier for others to find us and broadens the Irish NFL Show family. All right, we'll talk to you real soon.